Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has the rather frightful habit of tending to go on, you know.
Tim Blathers Longo.
Oh, good, you knew which one.
Of course I did.
Yeah. You could have pretty much knocked me over with a feather after I received this text the other evening. I believe it was maybe Monday, maybe Sunday. No, maybe it was further. Maybe it was last week. Maybe it was Friday. But it's basically, yeah, I've played a billion times before. The
Animal Crossing.
This is one of my favorite Nintendo series, actually, says the text. And I was like, what? Yeah.
How funny. Yeah, I guess it just has never come up. I thought you'd known
at
that.
the time, maybe. Maybe when it came out, because I did play this a lot when it initially came out, or at least when I got a GameCube. This was one of the games I got pretty soon after I got the GameCube, which I think was, that Christmas or whatever that it came out. And I don't remember talking about it with you specifically.
Yeah.
It doesn't entirely surprise me in some ways, but at the same time, it was like, I didn't have that as a theory. I more thought you wanted to play this game because, everybody's talking about Animal Crossing Online right now. The new one came out at kind of a perfect time. That's certainly a good tie-in for us to look at the series, and there's a lot, I think, to talk about here, but I just was not it wasn't like, oh, and by the way, I've played all of them, and because I've only played the first one. So it was a little, well, I was surprised.
My confession is that the reason I suggested it originally, after you'd suggested your other one, which we'll play next, is I think I wanted an excuse for a bonus episode to buy the new one. So I had to tell Jen. I was like, well, I got to get the new one.
Brett's making me buy the new one.
And I also have semi-recently fallen back down the deep hole of the mobile version, which is Pocket Camp. So that's been on my mind as well, because that's sort of like that's a daily routine. The way it's even structured. So I'm Animal Crossing, and I'm watching all the news go by and all the people playing, and I'm like, oh, I want to play the Switch version. But then it occurred to me, it's like, yeah, we have not played anything really like that. There's hardly anything like this series anyway.
Right. The closest precursor I could think of was like The Sims, but it's not really like The Sims.
There's not The Sims.
It's a few years before this. I want to say like 97, 98 type time frame. I will look that up. It is in fact 2000. My mistake.
Okay.
So like a year before this came out in Japan. A little bit more than a year. It's the only thing I could really think of that. There was also Little Computer People, right, which is a forerunner of The Sims. That goes back a ways. I mean, you can think of some other sort of life sims, not Tamagotchi so much, but other things like that. Well, there were some PC games like that.
Another one I was thinking of that isn't exactly the same because there's more RPG going on, but like the Harvest Moon series.
Sure.
And there's elements, right, of really just the concept of simulating, quote unquote, a life of some kind and interacting with NPCs in a non-threatening sort of world, even though obviously there's a lot more farming and stuff in those games, which of course, the resulted in games like Stardew Valley and things, right? So,
right.
But yeah, I mean, it is hard to find a direct correlation, but I still think Animal Crossing as a sort of, I would even say, bold concept, coming out of sort of nowhere. And I think maybe the reason that you and I probably didn't talk about it much is I don't actually have many, I'm trying to think, I don't really have many friends who played it other than maybe Alex Noisy, who played it as much as I had played it over the years, so I didn't really have a common, we all of us have games we all play together, or we've played, at the same time, so we relate that way. But I don't know, I just
I did play it probably for a couple of years, maybe not every day, but several times a week. So I wish I still had that town around, because one of the things I had to do when I started this up again and had the memory card from the original, the original thing, I still have my copy, because I never throw anything away because I'm an idiot, is I plugged that in, and I had a town I had made to try it with my children once they got old enough. Yeah, in 2000, I want to say 5 or 6, and probably 2005. It was after we had moved to Maryland, and so I made it. They each had their own characters in the game. I was not Brett, but Daddy in the world, which was amusing to the people who watched on stream.
You were.
And I went in and was checking all that out, and I'd sent them letters. We'll get to that in a minute. But as we said, this was a 2001 game, which in 2001, at least in Japan, where it came out twice that year, first for the N64 and then for the GameCube. And it didn't come out here until 2002 in the States, but we're going to kind of talk about it as a 2001 game. Although I guess on the GameCube was very late in 2001. Also, it's a year that we've revisited a number of times. We've played Silent Hill 2, Anachronox, Eco, GTA 3, Civ 3, Devil May Cry, and Soul Reaver. Those are the ones I could find.
Doom. Wait, which must be which version of Doom I saw on here.
That's some other version of Doom. Doom's the 90s. So yeah, seven games we've played from this year. It's also a year in which we shipped our first game together, which was Starfighter. And a few other games from the year are Jak and Daxter on consoles, Final Fantasy X, Halo and the Xbox debuted this year.
Metal Gear Solid 2.
Metal Gear Solid 2. And then I had Advance Wars as a notable GBA game.
Yeah.
Maybe my favorite ever GBA game. I really love that game.
It's very good, yeah.
It's excellent.
Pikmin
and then,
as well, I saw.
Yeah, Pikmin's. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and Black and White and Max Payne are a couple of titles I picked out on the PC. And then one that I certainly didn't play, but ties into our WoW discussions and has been mentioned there several times, which was Dark Age of Camelot, launched in 2001. Right. So a lot of interesting games at the time. That kind of gives you a sense among all of those titles of how explosive this era really was. I think this might have been one of the first eras of real explosion in games again, because of the huge popularity of like the PS2. The PC was with 3D acceleration an even more viable sort of home gaming system that could compete kind of in different ways and cover a lot more ground in a lot of ways. This was definitely when PC versus console probably started to be an ongoing discussion, to which I've always said both. But there were always those diehards. So you see like the Ecos of the world, these very artistic, making us go, wow, you can do that types of games, to like diehard PC titles like Civ 3, deep simulation games, of course, which is something we talked about on the cast. Anyway, that's kind of my thinking looking at this huge list. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about it so many times at this point. It is one of those years, I think, especially with the Xbox coming out and sort of like, if you consider Atari back in the day being sort of, the US entry into some of the stuff, and then Xbox being the wave 2 of that same thing. But it's still a year of experimentation, like you said. And I think of all the ones you mentioned, I'm kind of scrolling through the list, and just because Animal Crossing came out this year as well, I'm just seeing sort of like anything that's even remotely dabbling near it. And it's interesting. Pikmin came out. I guess it's because it's the GameCube's launch. So you have Pikmin and Luigi's Mansion,
Right.
But Black and White is the only thing that I can think of that's, that you have someone in Peter Molyneux who is notorious for sort of, trying to think outside the box, blah, blah, blah. And that's the only thing that's really...
You can go all the way down to the worm in the apple.
Right.
Right. Was the thing, yeah.
Yeah, and just the creatures in that game, right? And you have your sim, it's a weird sim smashed together with creature, sim, and it's just, wacky, but it's just still in this sort of era of, I don't want to say traditional games, but it's games you would expect, and that's why I think Animal Crossing is a significant game, because of the era that it's coming out in. It just shocked, there was, I don't want to, maybe shock is too strong of a word, because I remember, we were obviously at LucasArts. I actually hadn't had my GameCube for very long, and I remember when it came out, and it had a buzz, but a weird kind of buzz, right? Because it was like, there was this sort of question of like, what is this thing? You have Luigi's Mansion, you have Pikmin, you're like, oh, Pikmin, that's cute, that's very different. But really at its core, it's sort of an RTS in a way. There's sort of a conceit there that you can kind of
where you have basically a character that is the mouse cursor.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You act from the basis of the character that you run around and things like that. It sort of finds a way to put that on the console in a way different from like StarCraft,
like Halo
64,
Wars or something,
or something else, that tried to do the console earlier.
Right, exactly, yeah. So you can see the lineage for some of those things, right? Luigi's Mansion, sort of like the Resident Evil of Mario franchise, in a way. No gun, but you have a vacuum or whatever. But this one
really sucked.
Okay. You've been sitting on that one for a while. But then, this one is like, I just have always been curious, and I'm sure there's some interviews and I won't say I'm sure, because they're fairly tight-lipped about stuff, but I should look to see if there's anything out there. I've always been interested on where this thing came from. Like what was the genesis, and something we didn't talk about in pre-show, and we don't have to hit it as a main topic, but something that Nintendo did, I think, trailblaze some on is expanding their demographics outside of the sort of core demographics that were typical of the time, and maybe that was some of the motivation, getting into, different gender demographics and different age group demographics, which they always were from a kid perspective. But and I don't know, it's just an intriguing concept. And I've also done a lot of soul searching on why I love this series so much, because it is so different from everything else. And I think maybe that is that's the core reason for me, at least, is that there's you can only have so much shooting and slashing of swords sometimes, you just want to have sort of a chill out kind of time. And I think that's why we were excited to play it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, this is one of a couple of games that I would turn to as really just a bomb from game development. That I'm a person who gets keyed up, and it takes me a long time to kind of come down so I can go to sleep. I used to have really bad insomnia for that. And I really kind of have to have time to chill long enough for me to just kind of ease into sleep. And I do that now more by scheduling. But back then, when we would be working all hours because we had a game coming out, I would go home and pop in something comforting to play for half an hour just to lull myself. And this was one of two games. The other one was the Spider-Man 2 game on the PS2, where I would just web sling around the city. I wouldn't do any game. I would just like swing around and just like cross the island and come back the other way and just do that as a kind of meditative thing. But this was a game that I could pop in and spend half an hour or whatever and clean up the weeds in my town and maybe buy a nice new shirt or something, and move on. So
those sentences, those statements you just made, like that's the crux of this for me,
Yeah.
Like the fact that they have turned this kind of stuff into a type of fun. It's just, and I just remember even just the ads, right? And sort of all of us like being excited about GameCube coming out, not really being sure what the generation was going to hold for Nintendo, thinking GameCube was going to be huge. And then as things started trickling out, seeing that, PS2 was just a force to be reckoned with. And then you see these ads for this thing called Animal Crossing, and you're like, what? The animals are coming, and what are you doing? And it just ended up being very intriguing. But some of the core tenets of the game, which we'll get into, and I won't go in deeply now, but just as an example, just the concept of real time of day, and that doesn't mean, I don't mean simulated. I mean real time of actual real life day.
Right.
That
according to your clock.
According to your clock, but if you're playing in the sort of quote unquote intended way, there's these little hooks that they put in, well, big hooks in some cases, where the difference that it has, not only just how calm it was to play, and like you said, it was such a good contrast to the mayhem that other games give you, the difference that it brought to the table was, at least from a game developer standpoint, so intriguing that you just kind of had to see what it was all about. And then once you get in there, it just kind of hooks you. At least for me, it did. I guess obviously plenty of people bounced off of it too. But yeah, it's such a fascinating thing.
Yeah, and it's had a number of sequels. While you were chatting earlier, I was looking up to see if there were some Iwata asks about this. And there are a number of them, and those would probably be good interviews to point people at. I haven't watched them myself yet, but I may check them out. Yeah. Those are usually subtitled in English, I think. So it's or even I think sometimes they're dubbed with people speaking for Iwata and the interviewees. I think it depends on the game. But there are a couple that are discussed there from the sort of the Wii era, and I guess the 3DS probably, because I saw City Folk, I think you said was the Wii one, and New Leaf. So there may be some stuff in there that's worth taking a look at. Okay, but cool. Interviews definitely exist.
Good.
Yeah, and it's the system that I think that this could exist on, or it's the hardware manufacturer on whose systems that this could exist on, because it's hard to imagine this making it on the more hardcore style systems, even though I think the PS2 had a pretty wide variety of games on it. You look at that or the Xbox, and they start basically at that point to battle for more of a hardcore audience.
Yeah,
not entirely. I wouldn't say that entirely is true, but it's more that. The 360, I believe it was, did have a sort of, I don't know, something maybe in the lineage of this game and Viva Pinata.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good example. It's in the same space.
It's in a similar space. It's not quite the same because the animals are. It's sort of somewhere on the spectrum between this and a Pokemon, maybe, but without battling, really. Right? I think. Right. I have not played enough Viva Pinata to really say, but
it was like a farming version of Pokemon. Instead of battling, you're farming.
Right. Okay.
It's like. The animals are the farm.
Right.
But it is very much, you got to catch them all kind of mentality. Great game. I think very interesting. But
I
right.
don't look at those other, at those systems in the lineages there and go, oh yeah, well of course the PS2 had
the equivalent.
I mean, I'm sure it had something. It just didn't break out and didn't have the staying power. Nobody's looking forward to the next iteration of whatever it is on the PS4 or PS5 or the next Xbox. So it's it's something that GameCube did and have had. That's what everybody's playing right now. So all going out to their islands when we can't go out to islands.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's and I think it's another one of those examples of the sort of, I think you hit the nail on the head that Nintendo's the only place that this could have happened, because I don't even know how you pitch and greenlight a game like this, right? I mean, they're obviously notorious for experimenting, prototyping quite heavily, so they knew what they had obviously before that they had something that could really, be interesting to people. But it's just, it's so different and so like such an antithesis to the sorts of verbs and expectations that gamers had at the time, that, it just seems like such a high risk, endeavor. And once I was telling Brett in the pre-show that, even though I've played every version, the only two I haven't played, I was looking at the list, there's a couple spin-off games, Happy Home Designer and Amiibo Festival, which I don't even know what Amiibo Festival is. Those I haven't played, but I do still play Pocket Camp, and I played all the others. I don't think I've played any of them probably as deeply as I played the first one, but I have played them all, except for New Horizons, of course. And I just, like, I've never sat down until doing it for the podcast and really tried to deconstruct the game until now. And the first one is the simplest one of them all. And when I, as we've been playing daily and I'm doing that, I guess I just never really thought about how complex the game really is. I mean, it seems almost silly to say complex, but do you know what I mean? There's a lot going on there. Even though
there's a lot of interacting systems for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, it is, when we started talking about doing this one and I started doing the minimal research that we do before we start, and I saw it described as a social sim, and I understand why, but the simulation word kind of caught me off guard a little bit because, I mean, technically it's a sim, but on the face value, but there is, like you said, a lot more simulation systems going on there than I realized. But it's presented in such a way, and I think the daily routine of it and the verbs you use are simple enough to where I don't think you really think that deeply about it. You just kind of, like you said, you just kind of go through the motions. It's a very tranquil game to play. And it doesn't really cause you, because you're not, I don't know if it's because you're not really at threat ever. It doesn't cause you to really think too heavily about, some people definitely will min-max and they'll try to find the efficient ways to play. But the way the game is designed and presented, it doesn't really encourage you to be that sort of aggressive with the game, right? Because it's just different. And I think it doesn't cause you to be scrutinizing, because your life isn't at risk, right? So you're like,
right.
Well, how do I win, quote unquote, right? And
but about the most aggressive thing I do in the game is that whenever I come across a basketball, soccer ball, volleyball, whatever, I kick it in the river.
I figured. Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah. Have you, as a quick aside, have you had any animal ask you for a ball yet?
Not yet. Okay. I'm anticipating the day when I've already kicked it in the river. I remember that happening to me back then because I used to do that back then. It's like, this isn't my way, and I kick in the river.
Yeah.
And I'd watch it, bob away, and then somebody would say, "Oh man, I could really go for a volleyball," and you'd be like, "Oh no."
Yeah.
I should have done that last.
Yeah.
Which is a similar thing to like collecting bugs, because I'm in the habit of just running everywhere. I will often run onto a screen when I know I need to get a bug for somebody, because that, and we'll get into this, but it's a similar sort of thing where I'm used to doing a certain thing, but I need to adjust how I play, knowing the things that I need to get done. and I'll forget that because I'm just like, I'm used to just running everywhere, just holding down I guess it's the B button and just dashing around. And then of course that will scare off bugs or fish or whatever. Not that we've gotten any fishing yet, or I haven't, and we'll get into all that. I feel like we need to like start from the beginning as to how this thing begins.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to talk about. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know where to start talking about it, but
exactly. It's hard to know where to put the shovel in.
Yeah. I do want to come back to the sprint, make sure we come back to the sprinting thing, whether this episode or next, but I have a sort of a macro topic about that. But yeah, start at the beginning. Who do we see first?
I see first KK Slider.
Right. Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. Everyone
before we get on the train.
Yep.
He sort of gives you a spiel about, oh, isn't it so great? You're going to be living on your own. You can be free, which is all kind of funny and tongue in cheek based on what will soon happen. One of the things I really liked about this, and this is actually one of the things that Nintendo just does amazingly well. I was streaming this. I was setting up a new town. This might have actually been when I was texting with you.
Uh-huh.
And if you don't like sort of press the whatever A button to get through his dialogue quickly, he'll just start playing along with the song that's going in the background.
Oh, sweet. I never knew that.
And it's just one of those like Nintendo things is like, at this point, you've probably read this and you're just kind of hanging out on the screen. It's like Mario looking at you, or Sonic did that back in the day too, of just like looking at you and tapping their feet or whatever, noticing that you're there, being aware of the player. And in this case, he's just like, well, I guess we're not talking, so I'll just just play along with this tune. I mean,
the ultimate
I love
idol
things like that.
Animation.
Yeah. Perfect. But yeah, so he just he kind of does that, but you then go on to the train, basically, which is the train to your town. And that's when you meet Rover. Rover, I gather, has a long history. Maybe you need to talk about Rover, because this is the only time I've seen Rover.
Well, Rover, I brought it up in pre-show to Brett, like, because I've played all of them and actively play at least Pocket Camp right now, there's, because this is such a long-standing franchise, and because they have done such a good job committing to their characters, especially the animals, or only the animals, because they're the main characters that have identities. They, there's a sort of, I don't want to say Rover's like Pikachu, but he is like KK Slider and Tom Nook. They're so ridiculous. I'm saying these names. That they are their mascots, right? They have become these characters that they come back to time and time again. They have personalities, they have attitudes, they have roles to play. And Rover is not only the first animal other than KK that you meet, but he becomes somebody that is throughout the series, somebody that is known, right? And has a personality and has, just an identity. And so, as a silly example, in Pocket Camp, there's a whole, because Pocket Camp is a mobile game, so they definitely have very sort of tried and true mobile sort of rhythms to the game. And so they have monthly events, right, that happen, that only happen in that month. And so I think it's January. Every January, there is a Rover specific, like, elaborate event that just devoted to him. And he might be one of the only characters that has his own event. So to me, and I won't go down this deep hole, I swear. The last thing I'll say about it is, in Pocket Camp, you have your own camper because it's all about camping. And my camper is Rover's camper. So I had forgotten when we started playing this game that Rover was the first, other than KK, the first one you see, and he's on the train with you. And as a super, like, closet nerd about Animal Crossing, I had just a moment of glee because I was like, oh my goodness, I totally forgot that Rover is the first animal you meet on the train, and he is actually kind of welcoming you into, like, the world on the train. And seeing him walk down the aisle and sit next, can I sit here? And you can, as a side note, you can actually, I didn't say no. I don't remember what happens if you say no, you can't sit here, because Rover has the kind of personality where he would just sit there anyway. I'm
right.
sure that's
that was my expectation. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, the macro point there is that they commit to their characters, and like over time, they become legends, right? Just like a Pikachu or an Eevee or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, they do real personalization, personification of these characters. There's a lot I like about this initial interaction. He's a little sassy. He's a little, he's joking with, he doesn't know you, and he's totally, yanking your chain about stuff. And we'll say, no, it's, I'm just teasing you or whatever. And it's just bizarre. It's not expected in any way. Of course, I had no real expectations of this game back in the day. I do like there is this moment where he's sort of said, hey, if you're going to, and you get to name your town at this point, we'll get to your town name in a moment, and I have suspicions. But he'll say, well, I know this guy there, and I think he has houses to rent. His name's Tom Nook. We'll get to Tom Nook. And he's like, oh, well, should I call him? And he'll go between the cars of the train and talk on his cell phone in between the cars of the train, which, of course, how 2001 of nowadays, people just talk wherever they are, blather along, as it were, regardless of, heedless of social propriety.
And he's you can hear
he's whispering.
They have the text right in such a way where it looks like you're hearing it from afar, or he's whispering or something.
The text is smaller, and you can read it, but and you can also sort of hear him a little bit as well. So even though the train doors are closed, it's just, that's a real commitment. Because a lot of games, honestly, on a PC game or of the time, or like you think of something like character creation on a RPG from the late 90s, early aughts. It wasn't like this. It wasn't you show up and somebody asks you who you are or anything like that. It was, here's a UI screen.
Everything is
pick your portrait, type your name. You don't even see yourself at first, even though this is going to be a third person game. This section of it, both here and in talking to KK, is all in first person.
Well, I think that's, we forgot to put that on the list of topics, but we should add to the list, even if we don't get to it today. But the general presentation of the game having almost everything essentially represented in game, right? There is a UI from an inventory perspective and such, but like, doing things, which we'll get to as we go, generally has a real in-game world equivalent like this, right? It's not about a bunch of menus to go do a thing. If you need to mail a letter, you got to go to the post office. It is a living sim, so to speak. Which is another, I think we'll get into it, but there's a quality of life question there that comes up that I think if there are reasons that people bounce off of this game in certain cases, I think those are probably some of them. But I think that clearly is the intention, right? You're sitting on the train, and it needs to feel like you are really doing this. I think the other thing I want to mention about those opening moments that was always surprising to me, that we'll creep into another topic we'll get to over the course of the series, I'm sure, is just the art direction and the presentation of everything. And the reason I bring that up is, not only do they have so many, just like Pokemon, so many animals, but the way they present them, and I remember at the time, I thought was very clever from a game development standpoint, because of the sort of chibi sort of character design with the big heads and the small bodies and the very simple shapes and colors. But what that allowed them to do is to have fairly elaborate facial expressions on the characters. So when Rover's sitting directly across from you and he's talking to you, and they already have this sort of simulated voice thing going on, right, where they're not literally saying the words, but they have
so
sort of
Simlish
and sort of an attitude. You can kind of attitudinal, is that the word? Attitudinal, sure. Sort of. You can suss out. They've found, which I wanted to ask you about, how you do that sort of thing too. They have they must assign certain sort of weighting, sort of attitudinal weighting to each line. So it's not voiceover, but the Simlish sort of voices that you hear do relate well to the text that you're reading. You know what I mean? Even though it's not a voiceover. So it's like they find a way to have, like, if they're yelling and the voice sounds like it's yelling and then the text is also obviously yelling. I just always thought that was a clever sort of, from a production standpoint, clever use of that stuff, but also adds to the sort of character of it. And I think you see that immediately with Rover, because, when he's surprised about something, a question mark pops up over his head and his face lights up, and it really all kind of comes together as a presentation in a very clever but sort of economical way. But in a time when facial expressions weren't that easy to do on characters like that, A, the heads are usually too small, but B, having the amount of texture work going on with the facial expressions on a face was just more complicated than people wanted to or could do. So I always appreciated that part too. And you see it right away.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I really like one of the things I think that happens with the sort of Simlish style talking is that it tracks with the text. So instead of having, like in a JRPG of roughly this era, maybe a little earlier, like the Final Fantasy 7s, 8s, 9s, when you have text that's on screen, it progresses, and there's sort of it's not really a typewriter sound, but it is sort of like a da 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 as the text is printed, is displayed and revealed. And here they sort of it seems like they time their phonemes to some rhythm of that as well, and it just feels natural. I don't know if I'd have to really watch, because it feels so natural that you'd have to, I think, really pay attention and like ignore what your senses are telling you to some extent. But like if they're putting little pauses in the phoneme stream when they hit spaces in the text and things like that. I mean,
they do. Yeah.
I think there's stuff like that that's going on that just reinforces this relationship between what you are reading, because it goes at a speed that I think many people probably can keep up with. And then they just kind of talk at the same length as that stuff appears, and then it stops. And I do think that part is pretty much random. Like, here's a bag of phoneme sounds, or even just some loops. That's maybe not loops. I'm not really sure how they do that. It feels like,
yeah, it's a fascinating, like you said, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on that just, I think, add up to a presentation where you just believe it, that it all works together. The facial expressions, the sort of, they punctuate it, right, with them specifically. Like there's a laughter thing when they laugh. There's laughter audio, and then of course the ha 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 are kind of around their head. They have similarly, like, there's like a sproing sound that plays when they're surprised, and they make a big facial expression. And I think, smoke and mirrors is exactly what's going on there. I don't think there's actually anything necessarily super complicated here. Yeah.
The animations. Everything is just really, really well polished and presented. I feel like they spent time on these things. This is not, they just hacked it in. They iterated on this, and I'm sure they sat it down with people. I mean, that's one of the things Nintendo is famous for, is taking people who don't normally play games in their company and having them play everything. I mean, not just the sort of oddball kind of games that they occasionally make, like this one. But even their Zeldas and Marios for a new generation or what have you, they'll take people from finance or marketing or, whatever, people who aren't necessarily people who play games, and sit them down and get their reactions and watch them play and see what they do and want to do and all of that stuff. And this feels like a game that was kind of perfect for that. I bet this was a game that the whole company was super excited about, to be honest.
I think so too. Yeah. Especially, like I was mentioning, just different demographics, right? That they were, especially female demographics, I think were, probably really, that was where they knew they had something going on. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say with the sort of punctuation, visual punctuation of like the laughter or being upset or surprised or whatever, is a lot of that is anime styling, either manga styling or anime styling,
Chibi,
which
chibi.
and chibi, so it has that as well, which would have been a sort of lingua franca for the Japanese audience, at least at the time, and for a younger audience here as well, because anime such as, I don't know, Sailor Moon or whatever was pretty popular on like Nickelodeon, I guess, in the 90s, right? Kind of after our time as far as that stuff goes. I always feel like I kind of missed out on a lot of that stuff, and don't really have a good grounding in any of those things. But I do know that was kind of a period where Japanese culture was bleeding into the U.S. market a lot more, and so kids who are having a GameCube as maybe their first or second console might have been familiar with some of those idioms as well, and so it would have helped reinforce it as well, I guess. So.
Yeah, and as a side note to a lot of those, sort of the way they package up emotion and reactions from the animals, the other thing, like I was saying, where they committed to their characters long term, and they have these personalities that you see today in the modern games. The language that they developed when we're talking about all this stuff with just this one interaction with Rover, I think it's funny we've been talking about this for so long, but I think it is worthy to be talking about deeply, because it's something that basically you do throughout the whole game, right? We'll come back to it time and time again whenever you're talking to any animals, but the way that they presented all this stuff is critical to the success of the game. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, for instance, the little sort of effects that they play when somebody's happy, and the way that they sort of like have that little animation they play when they're happy, and it's like flowers and like butterflies or something, kind of warble around their head, that effect that they play. And or when they are sad, they play this. There's this little effect around their head that's like a purpley kind of black warbly thing that plays, and they kind of have this animation where they look down at their feet and are kind of upset. That is consistent language they use throughout the whole series. So today, if you've played the game before, not only is this very successful for a first time player, because it's very descriptive to what they're feeling, they've kept this over time, right? So they've created their own internal language without English or any real language, that a player can quickly identify. And also, if you played the series, you know exactly what each one means. You know what I mean? Because it's obviously successful from the beginning, because it was. But I just love that they've almost created this other reality, like probably The Sims. I'm not a big Sims player, but I'm sure there's a lot of similar things with The Sims, where they have a common sort of language that they've developed over the years. And by the way, Rover is a cat, for those who don't know.
Yes. Okay.
Which I also think is a good immediate example of their tongue-in-cheek writing style, the way that they look at the game. The fact that Rover, that a cat is named Rover, and he's the first one you talk to.
So we're about to get into town. Go ahead, lay it on me. What did you name your town?
Well, first of all, my name is Snake. That I chose from
character name. Of course it is. Right.
Character name is Snake. I did try to put in Outer Heaven, but it was too long. So so I went with Buzztown, which is actually a town from one of my favorite comic book series called Madman. So it didn't end up being a Metal Gear name. I couldn't think of a smaller one that I liked. And actually, the other reason I used Buzztown is I think that was the name of my very first town when I played back in the day. So some nostalgia there. But at least Snake made it in. What about you?
Well, I named my character Big Boss. No, I did not.
Oh, I was going to be so proud.
No, I just went with Brett. Inventive, I know. And I named my town Bullet.
Bullet?
Bulleit for the bourbon.
Oh, wow. Okay, you got bourbon on the brain.
It's got something. I don't know why, at this time of our civilization, I might feel the need to drink.
This is your booze now.
This is my booze now. I haven't been drinking for almost 6 months now. This is my substitute, at least for the next few weeks. And my soporific. So we arrived in Bullet and Buzztown in the B towns, and within 20 minutes of starting the game, we have a house and a job to pay it off. so much for KK Sliders. Live on your own, be free. Yeah. We are already in hock to Tom Nook the Tanuki, who has these houses. You get to, pick any one of these 4 houses. Hey, you want to check it out? Look inside. Which one's going to work for you? And we're off. I specifically made that note of like, it's been less than 20 minutes and here I am. This is it. I'm in my house that I'm going to expand and decorate and do all these things with over time. And the town is already somewhat populated at this point. So yeah, it doesn't take long to dump you right in.
No,
which house did you pick?
I chose
northwest, northeast.
I chose the southwest.
Okay. I'm across the way in the southeast.
Oh, nice. We're sort of neighbors.
Yeah.
Maybe someday we'll get to sort of how that works, even though I don't think we'll experience it. I was trying to think of it, if there's ever even a way to simulate, because we're across the country, we'd have to send our cards or find some way to send them.
Yeah, I don't know.
Transfer the file
reader for that. I don't know if there's a way to do that. I'd be very surprised because
there's got to be a way to copy cart stuff, but technically, I guess that'd be illegal. But anyway, the thing that we always used to find funny and talk about is just the concept that, especially if you're playing this as a kid, and it's very much presented like, I always, for whatever reason, maybe it's because of the style, I always think about, I try to look at this game through the lens of if I were a kid playing it. But, you get, like you said, you get a job and a mortgage right away. And, it's just such a funny concept. And I think there was always this sort of tension, at least as adults playing it, where we're like, wow, like that's pretty ballsy to immediately come out and say, we're going to give the player a mortgage and have this sounds at the time like a pretty high price point to have to pay off. And, the job is short-lived, which we'll get to in a second, for the most part, but the mortgage isn't. And this time I was thinking it through like, okay, why come at, because the concept of being in debt, whether you're a kid or not, is generally a negative experience, right? You feel like you're beholden to, especially this raccoon that is just kind of a piece of work, to be honest. So I always would think to myself, like, why start the game that way? But then you start thinking from a design perspective, the alternative. And that is being essentially homeless, right? And
homeless and goalless.
and goalless. Or he could have, the alternative is he could have said, hey, I have a house, but you have to pay me cash. And so then you're homeless and you do have a goal to get the house, but you don't have the house, right? And so yes, it's so silly to make this very cute game about just living life, immediately being essentially an employee with no other options, right? To this animal. But then you think, well, it actually is kind of an interesting way from a design perspective, to start off, because you give them what they want immediately, and then they can kind of have fun with that, which it's part of the core of the game. And then you just pay it off over time. It's just, I don't know. It was just always so funny to me that you start, with a mortgage and having to pay that off.
It's also where you start to get to know the space pretty quickly. And it's the way, sort of a number of things happen right away that help kind of introduce you to this space and to even some of the early verbs you have. So first of all, you get off in town, you're at this train, you walk down past a map and it's there in the background, I think, in the first interaction with Tom Nook. So there's a map. So that's good. You don't know that before then. You haven't seen it, but you know that you can go and look at this one at least. And you walk down to your house, basically. So you know how to get back to that. And he basically says, well, find me in this shop and I'll give you a job. So if you don't already know where the store is, I mean, I kind of already remembered because I remembered it was near the dump and I knew where that was. And I kind of remembered all this stuff from when I played before. But you run up to the map and it's like, oh, there it is. And you can actually, navigate around the map and be like, oh, there's some people here. And there's a bunch of locations that are marked. So now there's a map. You don't have a map yet of your own, but there's a town map that you can easily access. And you know where the store is. You see the dump. There might even be things in the dump as you pass it. I don't recall if there was for me or not.
There was for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there might've been a couple of things. And then you go into the store and he's like, well, first of all, you got to dress for work. Here's a shirt. So you learn how to put on clothes, right? You learn how to change your clothing. I mean, it's as easy as you could imagine, but it's introducing a concept to you of like your personal aesthetic is under your control. It's as simple as having an outfit and dragging it to your character. And you have to do that to progress, right? He wants you to work. So you've got to be in his Tom Nook outfit, right? I mean, it's just lots of little things like this that are happening. And then of course, also, you're going to owe me 1,000 bells per week, pay me at the post office, tax purposes, which is just like this sly wink of like, it really has to do with, you have to know where the post office is because you're going to need to go there a bunch. So there's like lots of just little simple, obvious, breadcrumbs that maybe I don't know if every team gets to that, right? It's very gentle in introducing this stuff to you, right? It's not complicated at all. I mean, it's one of the things people talk about with Nintendo, going back to the original Mario Brothers or Super Mario Brothers, of like, how this, you are naturally pushed to explore the options that the game has. That you can jump up. Oh, the first thing you jump up to has a mushroom. Now, you can pick things up, or whatever it is. Right.
Right.
So, and a lot of their games do that. It was probably something we talked about with any number of Nintendo franchises that we've played, because this is now like, I don't know, the 5th or something. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it is a really good. Yeah, it's a really good example of that type of essentially tutorialization where you're being taught without really even knowing it. And I think for this game, personally, my opinion of it in this context is that I think for this game to really work for people, because it is so different from even the Marios and the Zeldas of the world from a goals perspective, I think the tutorial needed to be very integrated into the day-to-day life aspects of it. So before you knew it, you were learning what you needed to do, because I think if it were a more traditional tutorial, I think that people would bounce off of it even more. You know what I mean? You kind of had to like naturally ease into living life in this world without realizing it. That's at least a theory, because it's just such I don't want to say mundane, but it's just so different. And because your goals are not typical, they really needed to trick you into becoming addicted to it in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And trick is maybe a strong word, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, he gives you this, he gives you jobs, which are like, well, you're going to need to plant some stuff around here.
Yeah.
Gives you a bunch of seeds. So now you're like, oh, well, now I know how to plant stuff. Right. And then he also has, I'm pretty sure he has you make a delivery to somebody, right? So, I mean, he kind of gives you all these this seated in this first interaction, which again, we're talking now less than 20 minutes to get to Tom Nook, and now like less than 10 minutes, and you're doing all of these things that you'll be able to do in the game, is just all underway, and it's super gentle.
Yeah.
And it feels, all of it feels supernatural, not supernatural. It all feels very natural. It's despite the fact that you're speaking with a supernatural being. It's all very natural. You're just doing these things that are going to become the bread and butter of your daily interaction with this game if you're going to play it for a bit every day.
Yeah.
And
critical, right? Like
I think he makes you go visit everybody too, right? I mean, it's like you have to go talk to basically all the animals that start in your house, or start in your town rather. So it's and they're critical to the interactions you're going to be having throughout the game. How you interact with these characters is some of how you'll make money to pay back Tom Nook for your initial and then subsequent mortgages. So there's a lot happening in the course of 10 minutes, and you don't feel tutorialized because it feels like just part of the fiction. Well, I've moved here, and I mean, of course I got to do something to get this. I can't just like get a house. I mean, you got to do something for that. Oh, here's the things that I do. And all of these are things that I'll be doing in the world as long as I spend time in it. So elegant. It's just beautifully done.
Yeah. And it reminds me sort of a little bit of, I guess your Mario example is good, but even like some of the positive reaction that people had to Breath of the Wild, as far as getting all of your abilities fairly early in the game and then using them, for the rest of the game. It's similar to that mentality where they don't do that with all of their games, of course, because it really depends on the game. But in this case, talking to animals, planting things, writing letters, those sorts of similar concepts, simple concepts, are all things you do fairly quickly, and they're critical to your success for the rest of the game. There are a couple things like fishing and chopping things down and bug hunting you don't get right away, but yeah, putting on clothes, delivering an item that I, let's see, what was mine? I wonder if it must be the same for everybody. Was it a piece of furniture or was it a shirt? I don't remember, but and then the house, right? So you get your house very quickly, and then you, I think the terrifying thing about Animal Crossing sometimes, especially based on your session, is it isn't a game with quests per se, right? It isn't a game where you have a list of things that you're just going to go down. You have to make that list sort of yourself, and there's a sort of freedom to that, but there's also a sort of overwhelming aspect to it too, especially once you get more and more verbs for the game, because it's a fairly small space, but there's a bit of density to it that has always surprised me. And for the podcast, going more deeply into what that density is has been interesting to kind of analyze. The one thing, I don't remember this to be for sure true, because I think it's way more true in the future, but I don't think our worlds are the same either, right? I think they're fairly randomized. I think where your post office and where my post office are not always in the same places.
Really? Yours is in like A2 or A3? I can't remember. I guess it's A3 for me.
My post office is in A1. And I think our ramps are in different places, and
that's wild, because having made 3 towns on this same memory card, the layout of all 3 towns has been the same.
Really? So where is coming from the train station, where is Tom Nook's?
He is east.
Okay, he is
due east.
He is due.
He's an A5 or 6, whatever. A5, I guess.
A5. So no, for me, he's only in like A3. So A5 is all the way to the east. So is he all the way to the east?
He's almost, I think it's 6. Isn't it 6 across at the top?
Yeah, I thought it was 5. You could be right. I don't remember. Anyway, and then
I didn't know that. So yeah, my post office is on one side of it. My post office, where the 4 houses are, where Tom Nook is, where the dump is, are all on one side of the river. And the river is to the west of, let's see, what's over there? Yeah, it's wild to me that yours.
Yeah,
I guess
my river's to the east.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it sounds like even possibly a mirror huh, now I'm like, and now I want to see your stream of this thing, because now I'm like, oh my god, really?
I'll take it
because like I said, this has been the same for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure it's not randomization. I'm sure they just have preset, right? They just, in fact, I feel like I have a vague memory back in the day where because we were the kinds of gamers we are, we were trying to optimize. So we would restart worlds until we got the one we wanted. Because of the route, right? I'm already, later on, I'll talk about some of the min-maxing I'm already doing.
Of course you will.
Partially because I've played so much of the series, but also
partially because you. Yeah.
My peach grove is already going strong.
I haven't even found a peach yet.
Well, that's also randomized, right?
Okay. I have pears.
Peaches are mine, yeah. So I only have peaches. Okay. You only have pears, and now ideally we could trade so we could get a lot more money, but we don't have a way to do that, right? Unless there is a chance that that a fruit will wash up on shore, but it's very rare. A new fruit. Then you're gold.
I hope it does, because one of my characters actually, which I want to actually get to, and we're already in an hour, so why don't we talk about who's in our town to start? I think I know exactly. I know exactly where my cutoff is. Yeah, I've got my whole list here. I was just double checking. So I assume that some of these characters are the same in every game. So like Copper and the other policeman, Blathers at the museum, the Able sisters who are hedgehogs, Pelly at the post office.
Yeah, the mayor.
The mayor, Tortimer, these are all the same, I assume.
These are the greatest. Talk about, just coming from our last series, talk about localization. I'd be really interested to delve into sort of how they, what are some differences between Japanese and English for some of these characters, because I think the localization is quite good in this game. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have Bertha, who's a hippo.
Nope. I
have Cupcake, who I think might be a pig.
Cupcake's great. I think Cupcake's a pig, yeah.
Pink, anyway. I have Admiral, who I think is a woodpecker, but is definitely a type of bird.
Uh-huh.
I have Goose, who's a chicken. That just makes me laugh every time I run into Goose.
Goose is also kind of legendary, in my opinion.
I have Anchovy, who's another bird. I have Patty, who's the cow, which is either funny, like potty humor, or dark.
Yeah.
And I think those are all the characters I started with. I think those are the first 6 I had. I think I had 6 when I started. I added Nibbles and Lily later.
Oh yeah,
Nibbles is a squirrel and Lily is a frog.
Yeah, Lily's great. Also legendary. Nibbles is too. Yeah, all of the early all the animals from the first game become pretty. So yeah, I have. So Olivia is also a pretty famous cat. She's got her own. Like for instance, she's got her own events and stuff in the recent games. And she's kind of an elegant kind of cat. So well, that's the other thing we should say is their personalities go with their house styles, and they're sort of presented.
Right. So yeah. If you walk into their houses, you can sort of see what they're into, which is fun.
So we'll probably get into house stuff next.
We'll get into that stuff later.
So then I have Bill, who is a duck.
Of course.
Also pretty famous. Liz is a alligator, a pink alligator. I have Tom, not Tom Nook, but just Tom the cat.
Of course, a cat, yeah.
Who is super grumpy. And then I have Ozzy, who is a koala bear.
Wow, we have very different characters.
Yep. It's the chances are so high because I think there's 100 and maybe not that many, but there's quite a few I don't remember how the first game. I had the strategy guide for this game. That's how into it.
Here we go.
Yeah. So I was really...
you know how to min-max those orchards. Whereas I'm like fumbling around and people are like, oh no, don't do that with the bag of money. So yeah.
What did you do with the bag of money?
I just turned it into money. apparently you want to plant those things.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Somebody who was not as familiar with the ethics of my stream later pointed out, "Oh, you got to bury that." And I was like, "Oh no, don't tell me these things."
Oh yeah, right.
So
yeah, well, and yeah, oh man, there's so much to get into with those sort of little things that they chose to do to augment. Yeah, let's see, and then the additional, I had Tangy join up, who is a cat. No, I think she's a cat.
Okay.
That looks like an orange. Like her skin is like kind of like freckled, or like dimpled, like an orange is, and then her hair looks like leaves of an orange. Like it's the weirdest thing. And she's orange. Weird. So Tangy. Gabby is a rabbit, and I just had Monique, who is a cat, who I think has an accent, maybe like French or something. She just moved in, so yeah, I think that's
like French. Like I also had Gulliver.
Oh yeah, Gulliver,
a seagull who turned up, I believe. I have that in my notes as well. So I think
Gulliver is as a inhabitant or a.
I'm not sure. NPC, I don't have a note. I had been keeping all my
Gulliver is
all my inhabitants together, so maybe Gulliver is not. Maybe it's somebody I just ran into. I can't remember. And I also ran into a character named Sahara.
Oh yeah.
A camel who trades rugs.
Yep.
Although I specially bought a rug that I didn't want. I spent a ton of bells on a rug so that I could trade, and the rug that Sahara was willing to trade was even worse. So I was like, well, I'm not doing that. So that was yeah. Anyway.
So there's scheduled.
Might say I had the rug pulled out from under me.
Oh, nice. So Sahara, that's one of the NPCs that shows up. I don't remember.
Yes, passes through the town. It was on Saturday, I think. It was on a weekend.
Oh, I missed her. Yeah, that's some of the, because I think Tuesdays, we're recording on a Tuesday. I think I think Red shows up on Tuesdays. I'm forgetting all that stuff. I'm definitely forgetting a lot about the rhythm of this game. Yeah, so we have our animals. They moved in, and we've moved in, and our journey will continue.
Yeah, maybe let's tend to the rhythm of our podcast, take a quick break, and come back for feedback and reviews.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We have been putting out the call for reviews lately on the show. We're in the feedback part of the show, and I want to say that someone has answered the call. The clarion call has gone out, and we've had a response, I believe, from Finland, if I'm not mistaken, and I gave that to you, sir.
Okay. Subject is Goldmine of Memories from _Dupre. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I just love this podcast. I'm 40-year-old dad who has a lot of experience from gaming in the 90s and up. I started training with C64 and Ultima 4, and then went on a lifetime bender. I enjoyed listening. This podcast. The way that authors dig into the game mechanics makes it interesting to listen to, while at the same time giving flashbacks from the golden times. Constant inspiration source for your own ideas. It made me buy the CRPG book from Bitmap Books, and even start Unity game development in my spare time. It's a solid podcast for anyone who likes gaming or game development. From Petri. I hope that is also pronounced correctly. Thank you for that.
Yeah, those Finns, naming their kids with an underscore as the leading name. It's unusual punctuation from that part of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petrie/Dupree. And it's exciting that I always like hearing how we've inspired somebody to give it a try, right? That the sorts of things that we talk about inspire people to consider their own designs and maybe noodle around with giving them a go,
Sure.
however they want to do it. So absolutely. Hope you are enjoying that. I hope it is a rewarding hobby for you. Because it's always been a lot of fun for both of us to do. Stressful too at times, but that's because it's our bread and butter as well, which adds that dimension. But yeah, absolutely, great, and thank you for heeding the call. We also have a couple of emails this time from folks sending to our Gmail account, devgameclub@gmail.com. This one is from Derek from Spokane. So in your neighborhood, sir, its subject is Chrono Trigger ahead of its time. Oh, I see what you did there, Derek. Hey, guys, I played a lot of the SNES JRPGs as a kid, and Chrono Trigger was always one of my favorites. I played it at least 3 times, on SNES, through an emulator, and then on the DS. It was great to hear your thoughts and surprises, and it really brought a sense of nostalgia that none of your other series have been able to bring. I don't play many RPGs anymore because I'm an adult with adult things to do and 3 kids, but coincidentally, I've been playing through Octopath Traveler on the Switch while you guys have been doing your Chrono Trigger episodes. Overall, it's a solid game, great in some aspects, but there are 3 main things that have frustrated me throughout the hours I've put into it. 1, random encounters. I understand why random encounters were first implemented in NES JRPGs due to limitations with the hardware, but I don't think anyone has ever said, "Oh boy, random encounters." 2, characters who are not currently in the active party do not gain experience. I constantly shift party members to keep everyone leveled, which you need to do to complete all 8 character stories, but it always felt like I was needing to take a step backward every time I swapped party members. Why not let inactive party members gain at least some experience, even just 50%? And then 3, you can only switch party members at a town tavern. This is an annoyance because each character has a specific ability they can do outside of combat, but must be active in the party to use. As an example, there are purple chests throughout the game, at least one in almost every dungeon, that can only be opened by Therion the Thief.
No.
If Therion is not in your party and you are a completionist, yeah, you can hear the completionist on the cast moaning, well, you better trek back to town, pick up Therion, then come back and open that chest, then go back and swap him back out. Or occasionally you run into NPCs outside of towns that you need to interact with using certain abilities, and you better hope you have the right party members. This leads to a ton of backtracking if you're looking to do everything. I've had these gripes with the game since I started it, but was still having fun, so I learned to live with it, as I did as a kid playing JRPGs. What was interesting is that while listening to you talk about Chrono Trigger, my frustrations with Octopath Traveler only became intensely magnified. You reminded me that Chrono Trigger has none of these things. No random encounters. Inactive characters get 75% of XP. You can switch characters on a whim. They figured this stuff out 25 years ago, and yet here we are reviving these annoying mechanics. I now feel like this game was designed to purposefully waste my time, and it's downright disrespectful. I understand Octopath Traveler is a deliberate throwback to old-school RPGs, but you can still be a throwback without reviving the most annoying aspects of those old games. These mechanics do not increase my enjoyment of the game. These mechanics are not fun. Chrono Trigger was a game that knew how to have fun, balance things just right, and made those quality of life improvements that make the game that much more enjoyable. To sum it up, Chrono Trigger respects the player's time. It's a shame that Square Enix didn't carry some of these philosophies over to Octopath Traveler. Here comes a controversial opinion. I'm still waiting for a proper Chrono Trigger follow-up. Chrono Cross doesn't count. One that I have my eye on is Sea of Stars by Sabotage Studios, which seems to be pulling quite a few things from Chrono Trigger's playbook as something of a spiritual successor. They had a very successful Kickstarter earlier this year. If you're in the mood for another great 16-bit JRPG, speaking to Brett specifically, I think, check out Lufia 2, Rise of the Sinistrals. Don't bother playing the first one. I'm not sure what options are available to play it today, but it's a severely underappreciated gem, except by those who have played it. It's like a combination of JRPG with Zelda dungeon design and a surprisingly poignant story. The original Super Mario RPG also shares a lot of DNA with Chrono Trigger and has a similar sense of fun and whimsy with its characters. Thanks, guys. Apologies for the long email. Can't help myself, but trim it down as needed. Derek from Spokane. Yeah, I have also recently had an RPG experience where there were some throwbacks that were very upsetting to me. People who watch the stream will know I'm not going to go into it. I don't like to dig on any game except when I'm in the midst of the frustration. So I'm not gonna call it out. But there were definitely some choices made that I found not like choices one should make, even when throwing back to old school games. That's a weird thing to me to hear that this is true of Octopath Traveler. Is not a game that I was specifically aiming to play, although I am very curious now about this Lufia 2, which is a game I've never even heard of. And I will note that Super Mario RPG is going to be up for vote, I think sometime this summer, which is Super Mario Legend of the Seven Stars, I think it's called, which is on my SNES Classic. It'll be up for vote against something else, probably Final Fantasy VI, also on the SNES Classic. So you'll have to come to the stream and vote, Derek. I don't know. You have any thoughts there?
No, I mean, not too many, but I do agree with him that since finishing Chrono Trigger, I definitely think about it often, and I really look back fondly on it, even though it was just weeks ago. And I do think that I will have a heart if I ever do play another JRPG, which is probably a when, to be honest. I say if, but when I play another JRPG, I probably will have similar reaction to him in as far as some of those, I don't even want to say quality of life, but just design decisions that I think I'm going to have a hard time going back, Yeah. Like I mentioned on the cast, I want to get back into Ni no Kuni. I don't remember. They have a combination. I think they have some random encounters and then some non. But maybe they're closer to Chrono Trigger. But,
you can see everything on the map in Ni no Kuni.
All the time, even in the world map. Okay.
Even in the wilderness, yeah.
Okay. Well, then those sorts of things. But like some of his points, I actually was kind of interested in Octopath because it's such an interesting looking game and had heard some good things. But now I'm not. He said that because I just can't. No
potential sale lost.
Yeah, I just don't get why somebody would make those decisions at this time. And maybe the throwback. I don't even think the throwback is worth the design.
It's not. It's a really strange thing. I mean, he mentions like why they did it on NES era RPGs. I mean, really, we've talked about this, right? It's the relief valve on I can't
balance.
I'm not leveled, right? The balance, we got the balance wrong, so we have to have the ability to let the player grind, right? I don't think that's a bad decision. I think random encounters are not the way to do it. So, yeah. I think that like a non-constant random encounter, like an occasional random encounter, is also not necessarily terrible. But it also just feels like I rolled a number from a table. Like, yeah.
But he's right that Chrono Trigger figured it out anyway, right? They just, their solution was respawning. So it's like, I don't know. It's just weird. I mean, games, one of the bread and butter aspects, for better for worse, for games is randomization, right? It's whether it's loot, whether it's encounters. So there's something to that people seem to like. But I think when the stakes are as high as leveling, or getting experience through encounters, I just think it adds too much frustration. And the whole party construction that he was talking about too, that it just doesn't make sense. And like I groaned at, that's just, it's silly. So yeah.
Yeah, it makes me curious to know what like the Dragon Quest 8s of the world are doing now and things like that. Or whatever, 11, I guess, I'm sorry, is the most recent one. That's the one I was trying to refer to. The most recent one. I'm just curious, like, what are they doing as far as this stuff goes? I
Yeah,
can't remember. I played 7 or whatever the last one was on the PS2, 7 or 8. It was the number. And I really enjoyed it. I had a blast with it. It had a great visual style that I really enjoyed. I liked playing in a different world than the sort of Final Fantasy stuff that I was more familiar with at the time. But I don't really remember too much about whether there were random encounters or not and things like that. So I don't know if it's kind of endemic to that series.
Weren't those made by Level 5 for a while?
Yes. In fact, that was a Level 5 one. That's one of the things I really appreciated was the visual style, because it looks a lot like their the Dark Cloud games on that system, or and Ni no Kuni for that matter.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, because they're sort of one of the other main, I feel like, kind of well-known JRPG makers, right? Obviously, there's lots of them, but I feel like Level 5 had sort of risen up to Square sort of like status at some point.
Oh yeah, I mean, I thought that particular Dragon Quest was great. So
yeah, but they have like a different, like Dragon Quest has always had. They've had a sort of different approach to JRPGs than the Final Fantasies, because they were now they're owned by the same. Because that's Enix, right? That was originally an Enix. So
that was originally
Square
Enix
now, but but they just, like I said, I had only played Dragon Warrior, which I think was the original Dragon Quest, and it definitely was a different thing. Yeah, so they've tried to your point, maybe they've forked on some certain paradigms that they stick to because it's a Dragon Quest game. But so maybe I should try that out. You and Reed have potentially. I'm very close to Final Fantasy X right now in my mind. Like, I feel like if I were to play another one, that might be it, because
well, if you're talking to Reed, you must mean 10-2.
Well, so, but Reed and I also have that weird thing where we can't play.
Yeah, I know, where you can't.
I can't do it.
I get it. And I'm on record saying, well, I think 10-2 lands in part as a response to 10,
yeah,
because it is a continuation of a particular character's story. Well, it's 3 characters, but really the emotional core is one of the characters in particular. But yeah. Anyway, we digress.
Anyway,
I mean, so here to I guess to posit another random encounter theory. You know what? No, I was gonna, but it's like, no, that's not really a defense. Yeah. Never mind.
Yeah. I don't think it's a thing. Okay. So want me to go on?
Let's hit that. Yeah. Let's hit that last email.
Okay. So we have subject lured in with 8-bit games and trapped by a raccoon by the second quest. Sorry, I have a dog whining outside the door that you might be able to hear. So I don't know how to deal with that at this
That
moment.
was me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Hey guys, great choice in terms of timing with Animal Crossing. The last AC game I played was the original on the GameCube, but like so many others, I got pulled into New Horizons by its combination of charm, addictive loop, and the wider social options. The appeal I've been able to unlock and play in a selection of NES games made the original game a pretty good value in my eyes at the time. It was cheaper than buying the individual ports on the GBA, and especially and easier than hooking up my original console. Of course, I still rented it first, but quickly found it pleasantly addictive and bought my own copy. I then had to try to explain to my friends who worked at Toys R Us at the time why a game where you do chores and pay your mortgage was actually fun. You and everyone had to explain that. It ended up being a fun little chill out with one that, again, in combination with the lure of NES games, convinced one friend whose place I was crashing at while on vacation to pick up his own copy. We probably ended up leaving that game running almost all day and night at times. Up until then, I wouldn't have thought that I'd find myself staying up late just catching a certain type of fish. Even though my computer just slept. Even though the NES games went away with the following generation's introduction of the Virtual Console, the New Horizons has shown the gameplay remains just as addictive. though I might be over the fish at this point. While I'm sure you'll no doubt discuss the NES games during your series, I thought you might want to be aware that one NES game, The Legend of Zelda, actually came pre-installed on the memory card that was originally included in the game with the game. However, since I started my town off on a rental copy and didn't want to start over when I bought my own, my AC experience within my own town was denied that one game. P.S. My last email about Chrono Trigger left you wondering if I had never finished the game. That is correct. I can't pinpoint the exact place I made it to, but when I circle back to the game, I'll try to place it. And thanks to the discussion during Chrono Trigger series and the feedback about it at the end of your WoW update, I now realize that this alias, which I have used for decades, really means New Game Plus. Damn it. Billy, a.k.a. Still, the second quest.
Hello, Billy.
Yes. Well, yeah, I definitely want to hear. I hope you should, Billy, second quest, you should go back to Chrono Trigger. You should do it. And
see, listen what I've done, folks. It's taken me years, but he's on here. He's pushing JRPGs on somebody else now. See, yeah. That's where we are. That's where we've ended up.
That one particular one, I am. But yes, it's worth it. I think it's an amazing thing, Mr. New Game Plus. Yes, I did forget about the Legend of Zelda one, and was bummed that I didn't have that. Personally, I was bummed that I didn't have that original memory card, because I'd forgotten about that until I bought my used copy, which I had to buy a copy that didn't even have a box. I mean, I was scrounging.
Imagine they're hard to find and things like that at this point.
They're a little more expensive than I wanted to spend too. But yeah, and I'd also forgotten about the NES games within the game. I did get a few, I think.
Yeah, I had in that town that I destroyed. I had Balloon Fight on nice. An NES in one of the houses. So I had played a little bit more than the kids had, I think. But I haven't come across that yet. I think maybe one of my villagers has one. Actually, now that I think about it, I feel like I went into somebody's house and there was one in the corner. Yeah. So
it'll be a while, I think, for us. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how far we get with lots of stuff, because it's such it's a game that does require a long, it's like an MMO in a way.
Well, I've already paid off my mortgage, so it's all gravy from here.
I have as well. But
yes, I know. I know.
Still scratching the surface.
Yeah, I've paid off my first mortgage. Maybe I should say.
Yeah. Well, it depends on your goals, right? Because one thing we will talk about in the future, not to spoil anything, but I think one thing that I do want to talk about is the sort of acquisition loop in this game versus somebody who's played all of the games, and how that has evolved over time. Because, if you do want a certain furniture set and you're not playing with other friends to give you more sort of options or chances at the, bite at the apple, it's really difficult, to get the sets you want in this game because of the way that the acquisition loop is set up. So anyway, yeah, it's going to be an interesting discussion. I think there's a lot more, as I was saying, in between segments to Brett, like there's a lot more to talk about here than I really anticipated.
Yeah,
you can see from this first episode.
I know we've barely scratched the surface of the subject of the topic list that we had, and we added 4 more things that I wrote down over the course, and I probably missed one. So, yeah, who knew? Who knew? Indeed, I think you knew, being the person who's played them all, for crying out loud.
Well, no, but that's what I didn't. That's what I'm kind of saying, is that I didn't know. Is it because I played so much of it? I think in my head it is in my head I thought of it as a simpler game. I think because it's such a methodical sort of like chill out kind of experience, like even I think Second Quest said, and. So I guess for whatever dumb reason, I had sort of associated that with a fairly simple simulation, you know. But
Right.
as I'm sitting there every day and like trying to take notes and thinking about it differently than I ever have, because I didn't play the game to analyze it. I played it to not analyze anything.
Yeah.
I played it to fish or whatever, you know. So now that I'm getting into it, I'm thinking, shit, there's a lot going on. So topics are just flying out. So that was my surprise.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I look forward to taking out a second mortgage so I can build a room where I can just put all my gyroids. So.
Oh, those things bug me. I sell those right away. I can't.
Do you? I've kept every one of them so far. No. I put them up. They're the only things I always put in my house, but I'm running out of space.
No.
They make all these weird noises. I have a strum one that makes a strumming sound. Oh, it's so good.
They're really cool and interesting, and I love that they are in the game. You know, it's a very, very, like, I don't know, it seems like there is a Japanese cultural sort of connection to them that I wanted to do some research on. They might actually be a thing. Obviously not ones that make sounds, but like as a statue. But anyway, I love them. I love the concept of them, but they irritate the heck out of me. So
it is really funny that I walk into my house and like one of them starts screaming. So it's
No.
Very good. Very good. Well, anyway, thank you for those of you who sent in email and reviews. We love every email review that we get, and we read almost all of them on the show. And like to discuss your thoughts and questions. So keep them coming in both varieties. You can find the show on the web at devgameclub.com, where we keep the show notes, as well as a history of everything we've ever played. So you can go track that stuff down if you want. And you can find the show on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longer Jr. with a JR at the end.
I stream nightly on Twitch, twitch.tv/Brett Duville. I am, as of this recording, starting Metal Gear Solid 4 today. So I will be, the day this comes out, on my second day of Metal Gear Solid 4. But I start with an hour of Animal Crossing first every day I play. On the weekends, I tend to go for longer, more like 4 or 5 hour stints. So that'll mean a big chunk of Metal Gear Solid, like maybe as much as one cutscene on the weekends, and so you can look forward to that. I also let people vote on what's next. Yeah, what do you say? What?
I don't think you can skip or pause or save during cutscenes. So
no, it's true. You can, however, walk out of the room and let your stream enjoy them.
Yikes! Touche.
Yes, touche. And a final thought, our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. Thanks to both of them. Thanks so much for joining us, and good night.
Good night.